If you have a question from this side of the audience, if you will please come over to me so that we can get started with this session very quickly. No questions, no comments. You guys are super vocal, so I know you have lots to say, so let us hear it. So I have our first question from Ambrosia, who wants me to be her voice today, so I'm going to step in for her. So Ambrosia has a question. Ambrosia has a question for anyone on our panel. She wants to know, how do you feel about teachers, staff, being permitted to carry guns inside the classrooms for safety? Do you think this law will pass in South Carolina? Do you even think it's a good idea?
I personally do not think it's a good idea. I was quite shocked when I heard that Georgia was actually moving to allow, particularly on college campuses, to allow students to carry weapons, even in the high schools, to allow teachers to carry weapons. My take on it is policemen who are trained, police persons who are trained to carry weapons and use weapons don't do it well. And so to give people who have very little training to have a license to carry a gun and at any moment take it out. I was a teacher, I was a principal in high school, and as a principal, I remember teachers saying, oh, I felt threatened. That person said something to me, was rude and disrespectful. Those are the kind of teachers that would take a gun, and because a student has gum in his or her mouth, pull the gun out and say, didn't I tell you to get out? And maybe the gun will go off. So I don't think it's a good idea, and I hate to say it, South Carolina has a tendency to do some things that are not good ideas, but I'm hoping that our legislators will be smart enough to realize that's not in the best interest of students, best interest of the state, and not anything we need to move forward in doing.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Does anyone else have any comments on that question?
I just think it's dumb. I mean, you don't have to be a very smart person to say, well, let's give teachers guns, right? I mean, that's just, we in South Carolina, the one thing we do better than anything else is we do dumb stuff. And that's one of the dumbest things we can do. There are some smart things we can do. As much as you regret it that we've come to this, if we have to have metal detectors, we ought to have metal detectors. We have to have them for the airports. We have to have them for so many other things, basketball games, sporting events. As unfortunate as we may have to do that, and if we need to, and I think we probably do, then that's what we ought to do. The other things, school resource officers or police officers, again, you hate to think that police officers ought to be in schools, but if that's what we have to do, we have to do it, because we've got to keep kids safe. A big thing we can do, which isn't a problematic, is we need to teach teachers to recognize kids who've got real problems and then have that be taken seriously. Oh, it's just Johnny, he's that way. No, Johnny doesn't have to be that way. We've got to recognize kids who have problems and get them help, get them treatment, because that's ultimately, if you look around at the case studies of people who've looked at these school shootings, teachers talk about it. Yeah, we knew that kid had problems. They know who these kids are. We know who they are. So we've got to be diligent in doing that. And another thing that's very, it sounds simplistic, but we've got to look at how we build schools. I was out at Wando High School the other day. Wando has 100 doors into their school from the outside. Now, how are you going to protect and guard 100 doors? So we've got to start doing smart things about how we engineer schools, how we build schools, when we need to retrofit schools. But I suspect arming teachers is probably the dumbest thing that we can do in this state.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. And now I'm going to give it back over to Christina for her question.
We have Miss Deanna who has a question.
Hi, this question is for Mr. Noble or Ms. Kennedy Townsend. My passion is the special needs community. In regards to gun violence, we've heard several stories over the last few years where police officers who were not as trained as other individuals who with the special needs community, and unfortunately there are certain things that happen, either death or fatal injuries or so on and so forth. My question is, what is your concerns or your plans, in a sense, as governor, to help educate the law enforcement community on special needs and how to address those individuals with not a mental health, but in special needs?
When I was lieutenant governor, we made a very big effort to train police officers along with mental health people from the mental health department. They had a week-long training together, and then that continued once a week for the next 9 months. Because what we learned is that how you treat a person is not normally taught in police training. And so that training had to occur as a way to reduce the amount of violence against people with special needs or other mental issues. And it's basically, what you say is very important, and a lot of it has to do with not only training of police officers, but training of school resource officers, or everybody about how to recognize that somebody might have an issue and that you have to understand where they're coming from. And it goes to, I believe, not only special needs and mental health, but different cultures too. So thank you for asking that excellent question.
Kathleen used one of my favorite quotes from President Kennedy, which is, "Our problems are man-made, therefore man can solve these problems. The question is, how big do we want to be?" And that's really the question for us in South Carolina. You know, we need to look at other states like Maryland that have solved these problems, or at least done a lot better job than we have, and then bring those solutions here. You know, I don't have every answer to every question there was about what we ought to do in South Carolina, but I do know that every state is doing some things well, and most states are doing most things better than we are. And I think it's just a process of having the political leadership to say, we've got to go find the answers, bring them here, and get them started, and spend the time and the money to do it on this state. I mean, if you saw your papers, newspapers, or our media this morning, we had a prison a rebellion or incident, whatever you want to call it. 7 people were dead and 17 were wounded. Well, South Carolina today, 25% of the positions at prisons are vacant because we're not funding them. That's dumb. That's the sort of dumb politics that we do in this state. And you're going to continue to have more and more and more problems if you continue to pursue dumb and dumber politics. And so we need to do the smarter politics. Look what Maryland did. I think Minnesota has done some things better than other states in that area. Just find what they do, bring it here, be smart about it, and copy it.
Thank you, Mr. Noble, for that. And we have a question about legislation. Hello, my name is Shania Payton. How will we address the issue of getting guns off the street? It's easy to buy, sell, or trade guns
What measures will we or the legislators have to take to remove this issue?
That's a great question. There are different ways to get them off the street, obviously. One is to make sure that you don't sell them to people who shouldn't have a gun, and you can have much stricter background checks. For instance, right now, most of the federal background checks go to only those who buy guns in stores, but many guns are still sold at gun shows, so you can apply the same laws to gun shows, and you can also apply the same laws to private selling of guns. That would be one very simple and easy way. Two, you could reduce the type of guns that are available. For instance, we talked earlier about assault weapons, which we did have a ban 20 years ago. We could reinstate the ban, which assault weapons are much more dangerous because you can kill more people more quickly with assault weapons. So if you could reduce that, would be great. Three, you could get rid of, as we did in Maryland, Saturday night specials, which we did through referendum. So if you make the guns harder to acquire, that is one way to get many of them off the streets. And then, very frankly, you can do a lot better by reducing the use of guns, by giving people alternative ways to live, like good jobs with good pay and good benefits, so that people have something to live to and not get involved in the behaviors that would lead to guns, which were gang behaviors, drug behaviors, or family violence. There's a lot more that could be done on the family violence issue if we want to get involved with that today, but I'm going to leave my answer there. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to add to that, so that I would love to hear from Dr. Evans and from Ms. Wright, is Ms. Townsend addressed the question more so about legislation and government, and recognizing that these processes do take time. One of the things that we've noticed is we didn't always have this gun violence issue prior to, I think Christina told me, 1983. So one thing that we should look at is how do we heal our communities and how do we heal our societies? So Dr. Evans, as you have worked with some HBCUs and communities, and Ms. Wright, as you are a student here at Voorhees College, what are some of your ideas or some of your impressions about how we can do some things within our communities to heal our societies?
Well, for me, in order to heal the community, it's this thing of not speaking out like we are here together. I think it's even more important to all voice our opinions on the situation. If we don't talk about it or discuss it, then we don't know what's going on in the community. Sharing stories, not being afraid to discuss, maybe seeking help when something is occurring in the family. I've discovered speaking about it when somebody has somebody to vent to, it's easier to deal with. You won't go looking for a reason to shoot somebody because you're not battling this thing in your mind. You're voicing it, you're freeing yourself from it, and it's not controlling you.
I certainly concur with what Ms. Wright said. And let me ask a question, particularly our students. I'm not going to ask you how many of you have guns. But what I'm going to ask is, how many of you have a parent at home who has a gun? Raise your hand. And I ask that question because even if you don't choose to go out and purchase a gun, the fact that you have access to it when you go home and you know where the gun is, and you might have an issue on campus, and you say, you know, I'm trying to, that bee coming to me, and I'm going to deal with the situation, her and her friends. And so you go home, and then you just happen to remove the gun from your parents' closet or dresser drawer, and you bring it to campus. So one of the things, I mention that because it's not so much that I see students going out and applying to get a gun, to purchase a gun, but you can have access to it. You know somebody who knows somebody, and $5, $10, or just to hold it. And so my concern is that we've got to learn how to deal with one another better. We've got to learn how to handle situations better. That the answer is not getting a gun to go and shoot. Guns do not solve problems. And so I'm hoping that we can do a better job of educating individuals on how to deal with one another, how to handle conflict in a better way, so that we don't resort to using guns. And the second thing is, we're going to have to put in some tighter measures to ensure that we don't have guns on our campus. I know students hate at basketball games when we have the metal detectors and they're putting the one. Dr. Hopkins hates that. He has some issues at a basketball game. But the police officer, they don't know Dr. Hopkins. He's like anybody else. And some well-dressed folks carry guns. And so we have to put our pride aside and know that we don't want guns on our campus. We've got to put in those measures to make sure no one has the gun. Even Dr. Evans, who might be packing, if he's got the gun, we need to pull him aside, get him off our campus. I'm just saying, I'm president, I do have some privileges. But again, no, I don't carry guns. But seriously, we have to put those measures in place to ensure that we don't have guns on our campus.